In June 1941, a German tank commander peered through his periscope at an approaching Soviet T-34 and watched his anti-tank rounds bounce harmlessly off its sloped armor. Within 4 years, these primitive machines would grind through Poland, Hungary, and Austria to reach the streets of Berlin itself. How did a tank dismissed by German engineers as crude and unsophisticated become the steel fist that shattered Hitler's dreams of conquest? On the morning of June 22, 1941, the sun rose over the Eastern Front. 3 million German soldiers crossed into Soviet territory. The German Wehrmacht unleashed Operation Barbarossa with unprecedented force. Thousands of tanks, Panzer IIIs and IVs, rolled eastward. They had conquered Poland in 5 weeks, France in 6. The Soviet Union was supposed to fall in 8. They looked unstoppable. They felt invincible. They were wrong. Then they hit Grodno. German tank crews saw something new, something terrifying, something that would haunt them for the next 4 years. The T-34. Its 76.2mm gun punched through German armor like a hot knife through butter. German shells, the same shells that had demolished French and British tanks, bounced off its sloped sides like pebbles. The 37mm anti-tank guns the Germans relied on? Useless. Tank crews called them door knockers. They made noise but couldn't even dent the T-34's armor. The mathematics of destruction had changed overnight. A Panzer III's frontal armor measured 50mm thick. The T-34's gun could penetrate 69mm at 500 meters. Meanwhile, the Panzer III's 50mm gun could only penetrate 42mm at the same distance. The T-34's effective armor, thanks to its revolutionary 60-degree slope, equaled 90mm. The Germans were firing pea shooters at a fortress. Panic reports flooded back to Berlin. Field commanders sent desperate messages. One message was clear. We have nothing that can stop these machines. The first firefights near Grodno turned into disasters. The 4th Panzer Division advanced confidently through morning mist. They spotted Soviet tanks. They opened fire at 600 meters, optimal range. Their shells ricocheted harmlessly, sparking off the sloped armor. The T-34s kept coming. At 400 meters, the Soviets fired back. German tanks didn't burn. They exploded. Turrets flew 30 feet in the air. Others reversed frantically, retreating. Some crews abandoned their vehicles and ran. Within hours, the 4th Panzer Division lost 20 tanks. The Soviets lost 3. The German army had prided itself on technological superiority. Their tanks were engineering marvels, precision instruments. Now they faced a sobering reality. Their weapons weren't as advanced as they believed. The T-34's crude simplicity was devastating their sophisticated machines. Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, rushed to the front to see these new tanks himself. What he found shook him. He would later acknowledge the superiority of the T-34 and express deep concern about German tank reliability and logistics. His report to Hitler was blunt. The T-34 was the best tank in the world. This wasn't just a tactical problem. It was an existential crisis for German armored doctrine. But to understand why this simple Soviet tank terrified German crews, we need to examine the radically different design philosophies of two totalitarian war machines. German tanks were marvels of precision, beautiful machines, complex systems. Every weld was perfect, every gear precisely machined. Skilled workers needed weeks to build one. A Panzer IV had over 800 individual components in its transmission alone. Each tank required hundreds of different spare parts. The transmission alone had dozens of components that needed perfect alignment. Soviet tanks? Built different. Built to win. The T-34 was designed for mass production. Untrained workers could build them. When Germany invaded, the Soviets evacuated entire factories eastward. Within months, they were producing tanks in the Urals. Teenage girls welded armor plates. Elderly men assembled engines. Workers who'd never seen a tank before the war were building 5 per day. The entire tank had fewer than 200 critical parts. Look at the armor. Germans used flat plates. Easier to manufacture, yes, but less effective. They compensated with thickness, adding weight. More weight meant bigger engines. Bigger engines meant more fuel consumption, more complexity. The T-34's sloped armor was revolutionary. A 45mm plate angled at 60 degrees gave the same protection as 90mm of vertical armor. Half the steel, twice the protection. Simple geometry defeating complex engineering. The tracks told another story. German tanks had 15-inch tracks, acceptable for the roads of France, useless in Russian mud. The T-34, 19 inches. Those 4 extra inches meant everything. Pressure per square inch determined whether a tank moved or sank. German tanks sank in mud. T-34s rolled over it. German tanks got stuck in snow. T-34s kept moving. Russian tank crews joked that German tanks were designed for parades, not battles. Engines revealed the philosophy gap completely. Germans used gasoline. Volatile, flammable, temperamental in cold. Their Maybach engines were engineering masterpieces. They were also maintenance nightmares. Soviets used diesel. Less flammable. Better range. Could run on crude fuel. Even vodka in emergencies. Soviet mechanics could fix them with hammers. German engines needed specialized tools that often didn't exist at the front. Manufacturing told the real story. German factories were cathedrals of precision engineering. Clean, organized, slow. A Tiger tank required master craftsmen, specialized tools, perfect conditions. Soviet factories were different. They were crude, dirty, fast. A T-34 could be built in a tractor factory, a rail yard, a warehouse. Quality varied, but quantity never stopped. The production numbers exposed the fatal flaw. Tiger tanks. Germany built 1,347 total. T-34s? The Soviets produced over 80,000. When you're losing 5 tanks for everyone the enemy loses, but they're building 20 for everyone you build, the mathematics become inevitable. Ferdinand Porsche designed the Tiger for perfection. Every component was the best possible. Soviet designer Mikhail Koshkin designed the T-34 for victory. Every component was good enough. One approach would freeze to death in the Russian winter. The other would roll all the way to Berlin. This design philosophy would face its first major test in the frozen hell of the Moscow winter. December 1941. Moscow. The temperature hit -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it got colder. German tanks died in the cold. Literally. Engines wouldn't start. Oil turned to sludge thick as concrete. Hydraulic fluid became paste. Cooling systems, ironically, froze solid. German crews lit fires under their tanks every morning, risking explosion from fuel vapors. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. Sometimes the tanks caught fire. Always, precious fuel was wasted. The precision optics that made German tanks deadly? They fogged up in seconds, then cracked from thermal shock. Gunners were blind. The synthetic rubber in their tracks? It shattered like glass, leaving steel tracks to slip on ice. Those complex transmissions with hundreds of precisely machined parts? They seized up. Tolerances designed for millimeter precision couldn't handle expansion and contraction from extreme temperature changes. T-34s kept rolling. Their diesel engines started in the cold. Not easily, but they started. Their simple periscopes didn't fog. They had heating elements powered by the engine. Steel track pins didn't break. Wide tracks distributed weight across the snow like snowshoes. They moved like ghosts while German tanks sat frozen, immobilized, helpless. December 5th, the Soviet counteroffensive began. Stalin had held back his reserves. Fresh Siberian divisions, equipped with T-34s, struck at dawn near Klin. They found an entire German armored column. The panzers were huddled together for warmth like cattle. Engines cold, guns frozen. Crews exhausted from fighting the weather instead of the enemy. The T-34s opened fire at point-blank range. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. German tanks couldn't rotate their turrets. The mechanisms were frozen. They couldn't elevate their guns. Ice had formed in the bearings. They couldn't retreat. Their engines were dead. Some crews tried to run. In minus 40 degrees, you don't run far. German generals watched their mighty armored divisions, the force that conquered France in 6 weeks, get picked apart by inferior Soviet machines. The same panzer divisions that had seemed invincible 6 months earlier were now scrap metal. Heinz Guderian acknowledged the superiority of the T-34 and expressed deep concern about German tank reliability. His message to Hitler was desperate. They needed new tanks immediately. The Wehrmacht had expected another blitzkrieg victory. Instead, they got a lesson in physics. Complex machines fail in extreme conditions. Simple machines survive. The more parts you have, the more things can break. The T-34 had fewer things to break. The Battle of Moscow wasn't just a military defeat. It shattered the myth of German technical superiority. Their sophisticated tanks had become million Reichsmark paperweights, monuments to over-engineering. Desperate to counter the T-34 threat, Germany would double down on the very philosophy that was already failing them. Germany's answer to the T-34? Build bigger, more complex tanks. If precision engineering had failed, try more precision. More complexity. More weight. The Tiger weighed 56 tons. It had an 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. Its armor was nearly impenetrable, 100mm thick on the front. It was also a disaster. Each Tiger cost as much as 8 T-34s. It drank 2 gallons of fuel per mile. A T-34 could go 180 miles on a tank of diesel. A Tiger? 60 miles if you were lucky. Most bridges couldn't support its weight. It needed special railroad cars. Moving one Tiger required the logistics of moving a whole platoon. It needed constant maintenance. The transmission failed every 100 miles. The overlapping wheels, an engineering marvel, trapped mud that froze solid in winter, immobilizing the tank. The Panther was supposed to fix these problems. It was Germany's direct response to the T-34. Lighter than the Tiger at 45 tons, but still twice the weight of a T-34. Sloped armor like the T-34, but thicker. A high-velocity 75mm gun. On paper, it was perfect. In reality, it was a nightmare. The final drive broke constantly, a flaw never fixed throughout the war. The fuel pump leaked, causing fires. The transmission couldn't handle the weight. Early models caught fire so often that crews nicknamed them flaming coffins. German engineers kept adding modifications. Each modification added complexity. More complexity meant more problems. These tanks required specialized training. 6 months to train a Tiger crew properly. 2 weeks for a T-34 crew. When a German tank ace with years of experience died, he was irreplaceable. When a Soviet tanker died, there were 10 more behind him. The Germans were building tanks for an army they no longer had. Hitler personally obsessed over tank specifications. He demanded thicker armor, bigger guns, more features, electric transmission, better optics, wider tracks. Each modification made the tanks more complex, more expensive, more unreliable. He believed in wonder weapons, the perfect tank that would win the war. Albert Speer, Germany's production minister, saw the writing on the wall. Germany couldn't compete with Soviet production. They were building tanks like Swiss watches while the Soviets built them like hammers. Speer tried to simplify production. Hitler refused. He wanted perfection. By 1943, Germany prepared for one last gamble. They would concentrate their new Tigers and Panthers for a massive offensive at Kursk. Over 200 brand new Panthers, 90 Tigers. Their most experienced crews. The best of everything. Technology would triumph over numbers. They were catastrophically wrong. The ultimate test of these competing philosophies would come at Kursk, where Hitler gambled everything on his technological superiority. July 5, 1943, Operation Citadel began. Germany assembled their best units for this attack. Elite SS divisions, veteran Wehrmacht units. They brought 200 new Panthers fresh from the factory. 90 Tigers. Their most experienced crews. The finest tank commanders in the German army. The Panthers broke down before reaching combat. Of 200 deployed, 160 failed mechanically on the way to the battlefield. Transmissions failed. Fuel pumps leaked. Final drives shattered. Some caught fire. Brand new tanks, fresh from the factory, dead before firing a shot. The Soviets were ready. They'd known the attack was coming for months. They concentrated over 5,000 T-34s in defensive positions. They dug tank ditches 20 feet deep, laid 400,000 mines, created kill zones where every meter was covered by anti-tank guns. They turned the battlefield into a meat grinder. July 12th, Prokhorovka. The largest tank battle in history erupted. 800 tanks engaged simultaneously. German Tigers and Panthers charged Soviet positions. The Soviets didn't retreat. They attacked. T-34s closed the distance at full speed. At long range, German guns were superior. A Tiger could kill a T-34 at 1,500 meters. But at 100 meters, it didn't matter. T-34 crews rammed German tanks when their guns couldn't penetrate. They knew they had replacements. The Germans didn't. Soviet tank crews used brutal tactics. They targeted German tanks' tracks, immobilizing them. Then they circled behind for killing shots. They swarmed isolated Tigers. 3 T-34s for 1 Tiger. Good trade. 4 for 1? Still acceptable. The Soviets could afford it. The Germans couldn't. German crews fought brilliantly. Their training showed. Their kill ratios were impressive, sometimes 10 to 1. But it didn't matter. For every T-34 destroyed, 2 more appeared. Soviet factories were producing hundreds while Germany struggled to build dozens. The mathematics of attrition had taken over. The battlefield became a graveyard of German armor. Burned-out Tigers and Panthers littered the steppes. Each represented millions of Reichsmarks. Months of production. Irreplaceable crews. The elite of the German army was being ground to dust. After Kursk, Germany never launched another major offensive in the east. They'd lost too many tanks. Too many experienced crews. Most importantly, they'd lost the initiative. From now on, they would only retreat. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky watched the German retreat. The Wehrmacht's best units were broken. The myth of the superweapon was dead. The T-34 had won. After Kursk, the T-34 would lead an unstoppable steel tide that would roll westward for 2 years. 1944 became the year of the avalanche. Soviet factories hit their stride, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. T-34s rolled off assembly lines every few hours, crude by German standards. effective by the only standard that mattered: winning. The Germans couldn't destroy them fast enough. It was mathematically impossible. Operation Bagration, the Soviet offensive in Belarus, deployed 2,700 T-34s. They smashed through German lines like tissue paper. Entire German army groups ceased to exist. The Wehrmacht lost 400,000 men in 5 weeks. They lost Belarus. They lost any hope of stopping the Soviet advance. German tanks increasingly sat idle. No fuel. The synthetic fuel plants were being bombed. No spare parts. The factories couldn't keep up. No trained crews. Veterans were dead. Replacements inadequate. Elite panzer divisions became infantry units. Their sophisticated tanks abandoned by roadsides. Tigers and Panthers, mechanical marvels worth fortunes, left to rust because a 10-cent part had failed and no replacement existed. The Soviets introduced the T-34-85. Bigger gun, 85 millimeters instead of 76 millimeters. Better armor, 3-man turret. Still simple, still reliable, still produced in massive numbers. German tank crews called fighting them hopeless. Like trying to stop the ocean with a bucket. From Warsaw to Berlin, 450 miles in 3 months. T-34s led the advance. They crossed rivers German engineers said were impassable. They drove through forests Germans thought were barriers. They kept coming, day and night, without stopping, without pause. German factories, concentrated in large complexes for efficiency, got bombed into rubble. Soviet production, dispersed across the Urals, continued uninterrupted. Even as Germany developed jet fighters and V-2 rockets, genuine technological marvels, they couldn't build enough tanks to matter. Technology without numbers was irrelevant. The final irony came in April 1945. As T-34s entered Berlin's suburbs, they passed dozens of abandoned German tanks. Tigers and Panthers sat motionless. Out of fuel, missing parts. Crews fled. These technological marvels had become monuments to a failed philosophy. Expensive statues commemorating the triumph of complexity over common sense. Soviet tank columns stretched for miles approaching Berlin. Quantity had become its own quality. The German army, which began the war with dreams of swift victory through superior technology, now destroyed bridges just to slow the T-34s they could no longer fight. As T-34s rolled into Berlin's suburbs, they carried with them a lesson that would reshape military thinking forever. The war that began with German tanks as symbols of invincibility ended with abandoned Tigers and Panthers littering Eastern Europe. Mass-produced T-34s paraded through Berlin. The myth of the German superweapon was buried under the weight of over 80,000 Soviet tanks that chose function over form, quantity over quality. In the end, Germany's Tigers could destroy T-34s at ratios of 5-to-1 or even 10-to-1. It didn't matter. The Soviets built 20-to-1. When a Tiger broke down, which was often, it needed specialized parts that might not exist. When a T-34 broke down, which was less often, another one was already rolling off the assembly line. The T-34 taught the world a brutal lesson about modern warfare. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. Complexity is the enemy of reliability. In total war, the side that can replace its losses wins. The side that can maintain its equipment wins. The side that can train replacements wins. The side with the most tanks that actually run wins. German tanks were engineering masterpieces. They belonged in museums. And that's where the survivors ended up. Static displays of beautiful, useless complexity. Monuments to what happens when engineers forget that wars are won in factories, not on drawing boards. T-34s kept fighting. They served in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Middle East, in Africa. Some still run today, 80 years later, because simple works, simple lasts. Simple wins wars. The T-34 wasn't the best tank of World War II. It was simply the tank that won World War II. And in the end, that's the only engineering specification that truly mattered. What do you think was more decisive? The T-34's design, or the Soviet Union's ability to mass produce it? Which other supposed inferior weapons in history actually proved superior when it mattered most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more fascinating World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.